All right, everybody. Hello, and welcome back. This is another episode of In Liberty and Health. And today's topic, I was going to do a Sunday coffee, but then I completely forgot that I actually had my guest scheduled for today, which is kind of funny because I did his show recently and there was a little bit of a scheduling conflict, but I'm glad we got everything set up. And I'm glad that we got everything set up for today because it was very apt, the title of today's show, and what was kind of on my mind. And that's Touching Grass, which I think I did a pretty good job on the thumbnail. I thought it was worth a good few chuckles. But when I was on my guest show, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it might have even been longer than that. I'm so bad with time anymore. We talked a lot about networking and developing a good life for yourself. And I really wanted to touch on that again because if you've been following me recently, I've talked a lot about Rock for Life, which is the charity event that we host here in Pennsylvania, and just how important that's been for me over the last 7 or 8 years, being able to play it every single year in different bands. And then now, obviously, over the course of the last 5 or 6 years in the same band, being one of the headlining acts and just networking with wonderful people, all for a wonderful cause. So, I'm sure we'll get into some of this kind of stuff today, but before we get into that, please head into the description below. We are streaming on Rumble right now too. This is my first episode on Rumble in quite a while. I'm trying to get the backlog on there and start putting new episodes going forward there. I'm not streaming on Facebook anymore because it's like a dead platform. So uh, Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble. Feel free to subscribe. All those places. Preferably go over to the Rumble and hit subscribe. But yeah, go to all the links below where you can find my guest, everything he's got going on. Of course, all the links for me, everything I've got going on. Go to tigerfitness.com. Use code Kyle at checkout to get the best supplements. I used the sour gummy pre-workout. The what the hell is it called? The Ruckus, Ruckus pre-workout. Absolutely love the flavor and the way I feel after it. So can't recommend you guys go check out that stuff enough. Of course, Fox and Sons and Deem Fit through the link below. And without further ado, and all my shilling out of the way, let's get right into today's show. All right, everybody, and welcoming to the show, my dear friend Meta Prime. How you doing, man?
Doing well, man. Love the intro. Do you sell those coffee mugs?
No, I wish, man. I really wish I did sell some kind of coffee mugs, but I know that is my band though playing in the introduction. I tried to make sure I get like
Nice.
everything in there. So yeah.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Excited to chat.
Yeah, man. Well, like I said in the introduction, when I was on your show, we talked mostly about networking and all that kind of stuff. And as I also said in the introduction, I just did our charity concert last night, and it's so nice to just take a breather and not worry about anything, not worry about checking your phone for the latest hot takes. It was kind of funny last week when, the whole Ron situation kind of broke out. I walked on stage, and then when I got off stage, I now realize that we lived in like not a different world, but something pretty
Mm.
substantial happened. And kind of reminds you of like ignorance is bliss, but it's not always necessarily it's like a bad thing. Sometimes you just need to be like, I don't have the mental bandwidth for this right now, and I'm just gonna
Mhm.
live my life and be happy right now.
Yeah, it is interesting to separate those areas of your life, kind of realize the impact they have on each other because I think, to your point, a lot of people get caught up in
Mhm.
the entertainment value that is international politics and the online discourse. I forget who I was talking to about this, but it's similar to I used to be a big World of Warcraft nerd growing up, like back
Yeah.
in man, it was like early 2000
Mhm.
aughts, and like it was one of those things where if I get into something, I want to do it at like the highest level, right? Like if
Mhm.
I'm playing WoW, I want to be like with the best guild doing server first stuff, whatever it
Yeah.
is, have the best gear. And, there were points where, I think it was like after the second expansion or something like that, where I was just like, yeah, I'm taking a break and whatever.
Mhm.
And like you go from either like really into it or just not into it at all, doesn't
Mhm.
matter, like completely, just leaves your thought space. And I think that's kind of like what politics is for a lot of people, where
Mhm.
like they're in it, they want to be part of the discourse and, keeping track of everything that's happening and whatnot, But the second that they have like a vacation or they log off or whatever it is, like they realize, oh, this doesn't matter. I mean,
Mm.
there's definitely things you want to pay attention to, like, obviously COVID was a big deal and a lot of other stuff like that. But I think for the most part, we could pretty much get by without being terminally online.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I entitled the, stream today "Touching Grass" because, I threw out a tweet yesterday saying, "Grass, I touched it today," and,
Mm,
it like I said, it is really nice to kinda unplug yourself, but at the same time, there is just that constant need, like, "Man, I really wanna keep updated on everything that's going on right
mm,
now," and I think, like, a healthy thing to do is that, like, if you're on vacation or something like that, realize that you're doing that and don't feel like ashamed, but just be like, "Oh, like, this is something that I should probably just try to, like, I did this, I got the information I needed, now I'm going to go back and sit on the beach and have a margarita," or, for me, I just checked Twitter and now I'm gonna leave my phone, out of sight, out of mind. My band's about to play a 45, 2-hour set, whatever. Um,
mhm.
and just be present there because I think, like, I'm sure you see this all the time because I know you travel quite a bit, and I'm interested to hear about some of that. Um, People all the time, right? Just on their phone 24/7,
Mhm.
and I get it. I am not above that whatsoever. Sometimes good to just be like, "No, I have to just put that away."
Yeah. Well, I think that it's like at our core as humans, we're very social creatures, right?
Mhm.
And there's this element of like what's going on in the network, who's saying what about what thing, what's the latest gossip, all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
it scratches that lizard brain because back when we were really tight knit small communities, if stuff was happening or things were going on, like people wanted to know about it.
Right.
And I think that that's kind of like a core point in a lot of my content is, we need to get back to caring more about what our immediate local communities and families and, networks and fraternities are about. We need to rebuild those structures because we've effectively replaced those with this kind of like terminally online space. And, there's some advantages to that. I don't want people to think that, there's no value to being online. I think that you
Mhm.
can, meet a lot of really cool people. I think a lot of us, when we first got online, it was really cathartic and reassuring to realize that we weren't, insane, right? That we saw all these problems in the world, and we were like, "Oh, am I the only one?" And so I think there's a lot of value to the online sphere, but like anything, it's how you manage it, how you use it, and then also, trying to realize, hey, this energy, this desire that we feel to be connected, like the reason that we're going for it online is because we don't have it, in our day to day, and that's something we have to build. And it's part of the reason I really enjoyed our conversation is I feel like you're pretty active and running these events and getting people together and doing stuff in your real life. And I think, if we are going to have like online people who are kind of, sharing their lives with other people and, that kind of have some responsibilities or like a role model.
Mhm.
And, I think that, having more people be kind of exposed to and oriented towards, like community building, touching grass, like, being active local. I think that's only a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And like, I'm sure you hear people say this kind of stuff all the time where it's like, "Oh, social media is the problem." It's like, I don't think that it's the social media itself. I understand where you're coming from because
Mhm.
you're kind of looking at like the net result of it, but I'm of the
Yeah,
perspective that like a lot of things can be tools, right? When people start talking about
sure.
Ozempic or something like that, I'm like, "Oh, this is a tool. This is a tool for people who have a really difficult time managing their food intake, and this helps them block off one of those things that's going to help them, get to their goal, which is weight loss," right? Social media in this respect, when you look at it as a tool, it's like, "Oh, I can use this much like you do," where it's like, I'm gonna go meet up with people, network, and build community this way. Like the
Mm,
goal is it's almost looking at it as like a funnel, right? This is meant to get all these people together and then bring them into one place. So, basically like the way that we would do it for the band would be like, hey, we're going to advertise this out on social media. We'll put up some clips or some spicy pictures, some memes or something like that, and be like, hey, you should come see Rock for Life and then donate to the cause, maybe buy band merch or something like that. I get the vibe that you generally do the same thing.
mhm. Yeah, I think you hit on the key point, which is intentionality. It's
Mhm.
how do you use it for your own ends? Because I think a lot of people get online and then they just find themselves doom scrolling, or it's like 3 hours have passed and they're like, where did my life go?
Yep.
So having intentionality with how you're using your online time, I think that's really important. And realizing, I think it's also like creator versus consumer,
Mhm.
right? Are you out on the social media platform, putting out content that you think is like interesting and engaging? Are you being selective with the people that you're kind of connecting with? I think that's another big thing. Is a lot of times for content creators, they make this mistake, especially with like group chats. I made this
Mhm.
mistake a bunch of times building group chats, which
Mhm.
is you have people who are really actively involved, and it's like great, but if those people are bringing like a weird energy to the space, or they're trying to kind of monopolize people's time, or whatever, they're not participating in a collaborative conversation.
Mhm.
um the right move is really to kick them or to remove them or talk to them about it, or whatever it is, because what typically ends up happening is people will then come in, and those people kind of monopolize the space and push out other people that you actually want to have, who would
Mhm.
be involved and contributing otherwise. And so I think that there's a lot to be said about how to interact with online technology correctly,
Mhm.
so that you are making best use of your time. You want to kind of one of the big things we talk about is like signal to noise ratio, right? So if
Mhm.
you're online and you're just kind of consuming a lot of noise, how valuable is that? Like, how do you get more signal? And I think that's why people have been moving more into group chats, right? Because you're kind of cultivating a very specific type of community of good people. And especially if you're meeting those people and building relationships with them and doing interesting stuff and projects together and whatnot, right? Then there's a lot of value. Whereas if you're just, I don't know, I'll get invited into some of these group chats and it's just a bunch of people I don't know, and I'm just like, I don't have the bandwidth to like get to know these people, or whatever it is. So I think that there's a lot to be said for you, like you're pointing out, using technology correctly in a way that's going to benefit you. And I think uh, there's a lot of people that I run into, and it's just kind of like a broad problem.
Mhm.
Like I work as a tech recruiter in my professional life, and so I do a lot of interviewing. And one of the big questions I always like to ask people, because I feel like it really demonstrates kind of their ability level and intelligence, and also kind of like wisdom, is to say, what are you looking for in your career? Why are you applying to this job?
Mhm.
Right. And you're kind of looking for the intentionality around that. And I think similarly, if people are online and you haven't kind of done this check-in in a while, it might be a good time to do it. It's just ask yourself, like, what am I trying to get out of this? Like, what is the purpose for me doing this? Because I mean, inevitably we're all spending a lot of time online. And if it's just, if you don't really know why you're doing it, that then you're probably not getting as much out of it as you could, or you're probably, wasting your time, and so that intentionality. So for me, it is networking, right? It's building relationships with people. I think there's also value to when you're creating content, or, writing articles, putting stuff out, like it helps you think about things,
Mhm.
right? Right. A lot of people, it's like, as much as a lot of writers and content creators are up there talking about stuff, like they're still figuring it out, unless they're getting talking points from somebody else. But
Yeah.
that they're like, that's their process too. So I think there's a lot of value. It's just people have to know, what value they're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. And one of the best parts about kind of networking with different people, especially with different views, is that you can kind of always adapt and evolve and figure out when you're full of shit, right?
Mm.
And this is something that I constantly try to do, is constantly try to be like, okay, am I wrong in this respect here?
Mhm.
Because if you go back to episode probably one of this podcast, right? So all the
Mm.
way 419 episodes ago, you could probably find things in the first, let's say, 50 episodes that I would have changed my mind on from back then until now. And I feel like that's a healthy thing is you're more, if you're online in this sphere, the
Mm.
take selling economy, if you will, and you're not
Mm.
updating the information that you've received and maybe changing your view on the world from time to time. It's like, okay, well, are you really doing your due diligence? Or are you just
Mhm.
trying to stay comfortable? And this is what a lot of people I think do. I obviously hail from more of the libertarian world, but I always see people like, oh, that's statist, that's collectivist, that's authoritarian, that's this, that's that. They're not real libertarian.
Mm,
It's like, well, what use is that? Like, if you're just going to read online about everything, then like, is this really producing your end goal? Which, if you're a libertarian, would be to have a more a more free society. Is screeching about the non-aggression principle and how this person's not a real libertarian, is that really, once again, productive towards your ends? And the answer, I think, is no. And I see this in like
mm,
the dissident right spheres, where it's like somebody will have like a Jewish last name or something like that, right?
mm,
And they're like, oh my god, we can't talk to this person, he's subversive. And I'm like, I understand, but like, do you guys align for the most part? Like, if there's severe disagreement, okay, but like, where do you start and where do you stop? Where is it just
mm,
meaningless bickering, and when is it actually productive? And I see a lot of like useless bickering. You know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah, I think that that's kind of like the first article that I ever wrote was "Live not in opposition to evil, but pursuit of good." Right,
Mm,
and the idea of that was I just saw so many people online who were like mad and justifiably mad. Right, like
of course.
man, the more that I've thought about how kind of broken our mainstream, society is as far as like the ideologies that it pushes and the concepts and all the ideas, like it's infuriating, it's heartbreaking. It's because that there's a lot of good people out there who,
Right.
want to do right by themselves, by the people around them, by society, under God, all these things. But because we're just so lost from what is truly healthy, it's really hard to do that. Um, but the problem I initially saw when I got online was just so many people were consumed by their frustration, and they spent all of their time,
Mhm.
seeking out, kind of like accounts that were saying dumb things and just dunking on them. And it's like, all right,
Mhm.
sure, there's value to bringing the discourse out and people kind of, seeing that on the timeline and all that kind of stuff. But um, it doesn't matter if you aren't building something that's good, right?
Right.
Like, okay, say we destroy all of the bad parts of society, right? Well, okay, well, what are you going to do with your life? You know, like
Mm.
now you have nothing to complain about now. Like, what do you go do? And more importantly, I think that there's nothing stopping you from building those things now, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
yes, the world is tough. Yes, things are unfair. Women are largely horrible, and like we're taxed to oblivion, and the economy sucks, and we're like the real racists are the left, yada yada, right? It's like, fine. Are you gonna have that stop you from living a good life that you think is uh, like I don't think you should, right? And so I think similarly, um, when I think of when we're talking about all these things of like, all right, how do you, like people being online and just arguing and all this kind of stuff? It's like, okay, well, how can you use the online discourse in a positive way? And I think too, if you're putting out kind of like a positive message, one of the threads that I wrote very early on getting on Twitter was this how kind of like Twitter is the Schelling point, so to speak. I don't think I didn't use that term, but there's this old recruiting question of like, you're going to meet a friend in New York City, you lose contact, but like that day is the day you're supposed to meet your friend. Where do you go to like meet your friend? Assuming that they're also going to
Mm.
kind of be thinking along, the same lines of like, all right, we're going to just go somewhere and we'll try to meet up. And the answer is you go to Grand Central Station at noon, right under that like main center lobby clock tower thing, right? Because it's the middle of the travel, it's the travel hub of New York City. It's very iconic, it's easy to get to, all of that kind of stuff, right? And I think that's kind of what we have here is you have a lot of people who see what's wrong with the world around them and they're like, I need to find other people who get it. And so that was just kind of Twitter for a lot of us, and now Twitter, now X kind of thing, right? And um, and we started to build these relationships and get to know each other. And then through that, you build a reputation of like, how good is your, how good are your takes? Like, how well do you interact with people? Are you willing to, contribute and synergize and all this kind of stuff, right? And to me, it's like if you're putting out the right message that resonates with people, well, guess what? It's like if you're putting out what you genuinely are and what you believe and what you hope for, and you
Mhm.
put out this optimistic, positive vibe, well, the people who you're going to end up connecting with are also on that wavelength of being positive and optimistic and like wanting to do good things, right? And so I think that to your point, like don't like getting caught up in like little tiffs and all this kind of stuff. Like, obviously I do a little bit of like drama, arguing on the timeline. But to me, the way I see that is we're all kind of representing different philosophies and ideas. And, when I see something that's contrary to my own philosophy or idea, like I'll say something, I'll speak out, right? I never thought like, oh, that guy's like at a big account, I have to like play nice or whatever, right? To me, it was like, if they're saying something I disagree with, I'm going to say that, right? And it was funny because initially when I got on and I started like, building relationships and getting to know people and getting into the group chats, there would be times where I'd like speak out against certain accounts and be like, I don't like that take, and here's why. People be like, you can't say that. Like that's
Mhm.
you could like, you can't counter signal them on the timeline. I was like, why not? Like did we not come here to have a discussion? And then I realized like how much there's like this whole social element and stuff like that. And to me, I think it's you have to have a bounty mindset, right? You have to have the mindset of like, if I'm putting out a good vibe and this is what I want, this is what I am excited about. If people don't like that, that's fine, right? Like
Mhm.
I think we're all pretty used to being hated by the by the left and other
Yeah.
people out there, right? And so, if you have people who don't resonate with whatever your authentic message is, well then, they're probably not going to be people worth getting to know or spend time with or care about or whatever, right? To your point, there's value in discussion,
Mhm.
and kind of learning from each other and having those things. But you quickly find out who are the people who are worth talking with, because they're going to try to look for like collaborative conversations. And like that's, I guess, the point that I'll land on is a lot of the time when I see people have arguments or disagreements about things, the biggest mistake that people will make in those situations is if you frame your stance in a way such that the person you're having the conversation with, your interlocutor, if they're going to agree with you, they also have to like um like basically agree that like they were an idiot, or like, or they're morally wrong, or something, right? Like if you're like, oh, you're an idiot and you just don't understand, like blah 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 blah, here's how it is, right? You framed it so that it's impossible for them to agree with you, because no one wants to like admit that they're an idiot, right?
Mhm.
And so you always have to frame things in ways, have conversations where people agreeing with you is like, it's not difficult for them to do, right? Like, you can kind of work collaboratively towards a solution, as opposed to it's like this or that, right?
Mhm.
And so I guess the point being is, when you're engaging online, or at least the way I see it is like, I don't take things personally. I try to think about the discussions that we have on the timeline as kind of like illustrations of our own philosophy, and that we just like have those out for
Mhm.
other people to read, right? Like you're not really trying to convince the other person. Like the other person represents some philosophy or idea or whatever. You're trying not to be like a douchebag, right? Because I mean, the best situation is you're having an argument with someone is a representation of an ideology you disagree with, and one of their followers is reading you, and they're like, "Oh, this guy seems pretty, chill. Like they're not flipping out. They're not being an asshole about these things. Like they're making some reasonable points. Like maybe I'll look a little bit more into this, right?" Like that is the best case scenario that you want to facilitate. And I think that a lot of people get caught up in kind of like an ego thing of like, I have to flex on this guy, I have to like prove that he's wrong, right? Like they take things personally, and that's why like, like things of like, sometimes it escalates and gets into doxing and all that kind of stuff, which is no good. But yeah, I think if more people kind of looked at the online sphere as like, what am I getting out of this? If I can put off like, put out like a positive energy, right? Like I'm going to attract the right people. I'm not going to like get aggressive with people unnecessarily, all that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of value to approaching it that way, because then it's not going to it's not going to like devolve into stuff and take up too much of your headspace, and it's like, yeah, people take it a little too seriously sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I hate to see the mutuals kind of like flame out on one another. And I kind of had a little bit of this
Sure.
experience yesterday. And this was more with like
Mm,
people I knew in person, but like I had
mm,
like long, good conversations with people that like removed me on Facebook over dumb stuff. And it's not like
mhm,
I take that shit personally. Much to your point, it's
mm,
like if we have a disagreement, even political, you name it, I don't take any of this stuff personally.
mhm,
Like I can talk to people I vehemently disagree with, and we could still probably find some areas of agreement. And even if I disagree with you, I could still generally get where most people are coming from. So like when I see
sure,
people just
yeah,
like try to flame out on me, I'm like, bro, like we're
mm,
cool. We could still sit down and have a beer. Let's talk this over.
yeah,
Everything's good, man. Like I'm not mad at you. You don't have to be mad at me. Like
mhm,
I harbor no ill will. And it's kind of sad because I'm sure you've observed this pattern as well. When I put out what I feel is good information, if I talk about, something in the
mm,
health and fitness world, something about foreign policy that's an observation that most people, at least I haven't seen other people make, it almost gets no
sure,
traction. But when I start talking shit
mm,
about Tim Pool, Russell Brand, or
yeah,
some, hollowed out skin suit of a dude, influencer, people just go nuts for that kind of stuff. And you got to kind of accept
mhm,
like that's just the nature of Twitter. But at the same time, it's also
yeah,
kind of frustrating because it's like, no, actually, I want to share like a positive vision with people. I want to share good information with people because ultimately my
mhm,
goal with my content, kind of like you were alluding to a little bit earlier, is like I want to put out a message that's
mm,
going to change the way that people think or maybe helps them
yeah,
improve their lives. Like, I'm going to give you information about
mhm,
health and fitness that may give you a little bit of a different perspective that you can incorporate in your life. And maybe you add 5 pounds on your bench press. Maybe you lost those 10 pounds that you were struggling to lose. Like maybe this changed your life for the better. Like that's my goal in making content where I th- I think you probably see some people. I think you highlighted what the fuck was the dude's name? HP0 Lovecraft or whatever it is. Like I
oh
don't
man, don't
really
get me
pay.
started.
Yeah, I really don't pay that much attention to this guy. I've seen some takes. And I'm
Mhm,
like, okay, yeah, that's reasonable. And then a comment like I saw today, what I'm 1,000 times more relevant and better than you are, or something like that. And like
yeah,
the worst parts of me have been tempted to say that to people. And then I have
sure,
like this thing in my mind that stops me when
mhm,
I'm being a retard
yep,
and like when I'm getting angry and says like this isn't you. Like you need to shut up, you need to relax. You're in the wrong here. The jealous part of us, which I think every person
mm,
has, sometimes you have to take a step back and realize like, oh, this is the worst part of me that's trying to speak to somebody right now. And whatever I'm going to say in this moment isn't going to be productive and it's just going to make the situation worse. So maybe I should just shut up and learn my lesson.
yeah. I mean, the whole flexing intelligence thing is it's an interesting conversation. There's definitely like a meta game there where
Mhm.
it's like, look, if you have to tell someone that you're intelligent, more intelligent than they are, there's a few problems with that. Like obviously, first off is like no one reacts well to someone being like, I'm smarter than you,
Condescending, yeah.
right? Like everyone's like default reaction to that is like, go fuck yourself. Like, I don't care, like and part of it is if you're smart enough, if you are actually smart, one of the things you very quickly realize is like
Mhm.
telling people that you're smart is not never leads to a good outcome,
No.
right? So it's really something that like people will do when they don't feel like they have like a smart way to kind of come back in a conversation, or they're
Mhm.
frustrated, or they're just like out of witty comebacks or whatever. They're just like, I'm smarter than you, so I don't have to care. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you took like the time to make that post, like you do care to some degree, right?
Right.
And I get that too, because like, I don't know, I am um like I'm proud of who I am, right? And I think like that's another thing is I've written a little bit about like SOFONs, and I'll probably write more about this concept. But it's and I think we might have even chatted about this the last time we talked. But it's basically misconceptions in society that keep us from the truth. because I think
Mhm.
fundamentally that's what we're all after. We're all after the truth, because the better you understand reality, the better you can act practically within it, right? That towards the good, right? Because to your
Mhm.
point earlier, when you were saying that, you can usually understand where people are coming from, I think 99.999% of people, like, they think that they're doing the right thing,
Right.
you know? And your goal isn't to tell them that they're wrong, right? Your goal is to, I think, like, the best way that you can build, like, diplomatically, like, relationships with people is to understand, well, what are you really trying to, like, what is the common good that we can both agree on,
Mm.
right? And then where can we highlight, those areas of agreement and those areas for collaboration, and then talk, about philosophy or ideology or strategy from that standpoint. Um and so I think that, like, a lot of people, if you're trying to, like, flex your intelligence, or if you're trying to do that, it's almost like, you're not actually going to get to that positive place together.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of clearly a signal of, usually when people flame out like that, it comes from, like, a personal place of, like, like, lack of confidence. um
Mhm.
but I guess the point that I'm getting at is, I don't think it's wrong to be proud of who you are. I don't think it's wrong, if you are intelligent, to know and operate in the world as if you are more intelligent than other people. I think it
Mhm.
is extremely dangerous for a wise person to think that they're a fool, because, then they're going to give fools too much credit, right? That being said, there's a nuance to it, because, I think you start to learn this kind of nuance of, well, you can have, like, a king who's not effective in being a king, right? A bad king is not as good as, like, a good peasant, right? Like, you
Mhm.
can live your life well. Like, people can live their lives well and be better than people who are more wealthy or have these heuristics, right? Like, when I think of, like, Andrew Tate, right?
Mhm.
Like, there's a lot that I do not like about Andrew Tate, right?
Okay.
And when I think of, like, the nice little, little old lady who works at, like, our local grocery store as, like, the checkout gal, right? And she's just friendly and nice, and she does a good job, and she's just, like, a good person, and I've never seen her have, like, a bad interaction with anyone or whatever. I'm like, that woman is better than Andrew Tate, right? Like, because she's living her life in a way that is, like, authentic and real and positive. Like, you kind of think of it as, like, if you're one of the analogies that I like to use a lot is, like, D&D, right? It's like, we're all playing D&D characters. And the goal of D&D is not to become the king and get all the money and the bitches and the cars and all that kind of stuff, right? Cool if that's part of your story and that's what you want to strive towards, like, by all means. But, when you kind of take that step back and you're, like, hanging out with your friends and you're playing this game, what's the thing that matters most? It's the story, right? Is the story interesting? Are the characters interesting? Are they making decisions that, like, and sometimes you play, evil characters, but assuming that you're trying to play, like, good characters, right? Like, are the decisions those characters making admirable, right? Are they, the best they can do in their position at that time? And I think that's very much how we should kind of, like, view the world, right? Is, when I talk to people, I try to understand, what are you passionate about? What do you love? What do you care about? Like, and it doesn't have to be, they don't have to be changing the world. Like, um, one of my the guys that I know locally in my area, I guess he recently got a house, and I kind of went over one day. We were hanging out, just having, like, some drinks, and, walking around his little, like, his little property area, and
Mhm.
he's talking about how, like, oh, maybe I'll, let the woods come in here, and I want to, like, fill this area out, and I might do some stuff here. We might move the barn over here, right? And he's it's just really cool to kind of think about that, like, stewardship of the land, right? That responsibility that he has to make his, like, little corner that he owns, um, better and kind of nicer, and, fitting with the community, all that kind of stuff. And I think, like, that is the mindset that I think is so starkly contrasted by the people who are like, I'm intelligent and I'm super smart and stuff
Mhm.
like that. It's like, okay, and this has always been the way that I judge people online for their philosophies. And I think this is an extremely strong heuristic. So, uh, it's I wrote a thread recently about open-ended questions versus multiple choice, right? There's this idea
Mhm.
when I was tutoring the SATs, they had the reading comprehension section. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this. But basically, you read a passage and then you get a question and have a few multiple choice answers. And the default strategy for that was you'd read the multiple choice answers. You'd read the question, then the multiple choice answers, and try to figure out which one was closest.
Mhm.
Um, and you kind of like judging each one individually. But that was really time consuming and ended up tricking a lot of people. Not very effective strategy. The best way to do it was to read the question, not look at the answers, come up with your own answer in your head, and then try to figure out which of the multiple
Mhm.
choice was closest to the answer that you had picked, right? Because you're not biasing yourself. You're not limiting your frame of understanding to that like one area. And so if you can just say like, what is the right thing that we should be doing right now? Right?
Mhm.
What is the real solution? And this is why I have so much frustration with people like Curtis Yarvin and all these other guys. People will like, I made a post just before we got on about like low IQ women hate, right? There's that joke of like, oh, all these low IQ anti-Semites, blah, yada, yada, right? It's like, well, when I think of things that are counterproductive, it's well, the goal should be rebuilding families, communities, fraternities. That's where the strength is. Like, I
Mhm.
cannot stress this enough that we have this lens that we look through as, modern Americans, modern Western men, that it's all about like career progression and it's like, amassing money and success and wealth and power. And sure, like self excellence is important, but the health of the structures around you, like the
Mhm.
extended family, or is your family like getting together for cookouts and barbecues and Christmas? And do you feel like if you had a niece or a nephew and they needed a job and you could help them out, right? Like that's the kind of the thing that like the old money wealth knows and they kind of keep from us, right? That's another sophon is like no, like have these strong families where you're spending time together. And that extends out to fraternities and communities, like having your bros that you can call up, that you can talk to, that you spend the time with, having like being involved in your community and being able to trust people and help people out, right? Because it's like someone, I don't know, showed up at your house, like if you could like call up like five guys who showed up, like ready to
Yeah,
go,
let's do
like
this thing.
you would never have a problem. Yeah. And it's like great if you're an individual guy who's competent, that's good. And like you need that, but like there's so much more strength in that group. And so for me, that's the answer, right? Because that's practical, that's actionable, right? We're talking about like we don't really affect anything in the online, the national discourse. I think it's good to add your voice, right? And I think that there's value in that on the individual level of like connecting and cathartically like being part of that and having conversations and all that. There's value, but the real value that you can generate is the local value. It's the community, it's the family and stuff. And so when I look at these big accounts and I say, okay, are they promoting, that's my answer to the open-ended version of that question. It's
Mhm.
not I become a larpy version of whatever ideology, right? Because that's the problem that I see online is everyone adopts these kind of like social groups just like the left, right? Like this is like the right is no more immune to this mistake, these propagandas, as the left is, where the left's like, yes, I am non-binary, whatever, wolfkin, whatever kind of like little kind of niche thing that they want to like carve out for themselves. Well, the right's like, oh, I'm like a nutrient bodybuilder. And it's just like, all right, cool. That's your LARP. That's like, it's the same as being like Sith or Jedi in Star Wars or like Hufflepuff in like
Mhm.
Gryffindor. It's like, cool, fine. Like have that thing that you're doing, but also realize there's something that matters that's transcendent to that. And you were talking earlier about like what is the value that we as content creators and people who are just saying stuff online can do. And in my mind, it's illustrating to people, it's giving them intellectual tools for which they can understand the world around them
Mhm.
and make better judgments, right? And so if we can solidify in people's heads like the value you can drive as an individual is local, like personal excellence and fraternal networking as a foundation for business, community, and family. That's kind of the tagline that I go by. And so when I look at like accounts like Zero HP, who's constantly like shitting on women and being like, oh, she could lose weight, like, haha, great, yes, like we all know how to make fun of women online and yada yada, but like what value are you adding, like, to people's lives, right? Sure, entertainment can be fun, right? But if you're really high IQ, right? If you're really someone who gets it and has the wisdom, what you want to do is, through your art, through your content, through your creation, you're nudging people in a way that they're going to have a better life, right? Like, good comedians will illustrate truths of the world and allow us to laugh at them in ways that, like, have them click a little bit, right?
Mhm.
And my thing is, I've never been, I'm not like like a funny guy. I'm not really like an entertaining person, right? I just love talking about these things and diving into them and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what I lean into. I'm just trying to clearly illustrate what I think is valuable to people in a way that's accessible. That's the other thing, is I don't try to, like, make myself seem cool by using like big words, or like I try to create analogies or concepts or like philosophies or structures in ways that are easy and clean and digestible, so that people can say, yeah, I understand now, like, fraternal networking is good, right? Like, I understand now that, like, I wrote another post about how one of the ways they keep us from building strong, healthy male relationships is by saying that any deep emotional male relationship is just gay. It's just homo coded, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, and it was funny too, because I was making this point, and like literally someone in the comments was like, you're, that's gay. And it's just like, look, if we're, because I was saying, like, you shouldn't emotionally dump on your woman, right? Like, your woman isn't like
She doesn't
there
care.
to, yeah, well, not only does she not care, but also
Mhm.
women are a reflection of the energy that you give them. If you're loving and caring and you project confidence and this great vision for the future, like, she'll be enamored by that. She'll love that. She'll get on board, right? Like, she'll feel safe. She'll be able to reflect that love back to you tenfold, reflect it to your children, right? Like, that's the beauty of women, is they are this source of, like, love and amplification of, like, energy. They're very connected into that spiritual divine thing. But if you're giving her concern and worry, and you're like, oh, I don't know how we're going to make the rent, or like, the world's like falling apart, or whatever, right? Guess what? She's not going to feel safe. She's not going to feel good. So she can't be that kind of emotional support for the deep concerns that you have. That's supposed to be your male friends. That's your
Mhm.
fraternal network. Those are the guys that you go to, you have a beer with, and you're like, dude, shit's tough right now. Like, lost my job. I don't know how I'm going to make rent. Because the way the guys react to problems, hearing problems like that, are like, dude, we got you. We're going to solve this problem. Because that's
Mhm.
the whole joke with, like,
Right.
when women come to men and they're like, Stacy in accounting is being a bitch. We're like, well, like, you could get her fired, or you want me to go in and talk to her. And she's like, no, I just want you to listen to my feelings. Like that, that's how women react to problems. Men
Mhm.
react to problems like, let's fucking go get Stacy and straighten this bitch out. Like, whatever, right? So I think that you know, we live in a world where what we should be oriented to, the way that we should relate to women, the way that we should think about our lives and what to value and what to spend time on, and where real foundations of power are, right? And healthy power. That's another big sophon, is like, oh man, people can't get rich. Only evil people want rich and wealth and power. And it's like, no, we want good people to be rich and wealthy and powerful, because those
Right.
people are going to make the world around them better, right?
Mhm.
And so we live in this delusional, like, and we're so immersed in it, we don't even see it, right? It's the fish in water kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I know I just went on a very long rant,
You're
but
good, man.
that's kind of my stance on all this, is there is a correct answer, and hopefully, like, the good people are trying to drive more understanding of that answer. They're illustrating it, and then then meet your mutuals and build those relationships and get to know people in person, and like donate money to charity
Mhm.
groups and go out and spend the time, because that's what's meaningful, right? And I think, like, we have this, and I'll kind of wrap the rant on this. We
Oh, you're
have
good,
this
man. You're good.
perception that the only way we can be successful is this huge overturning of the power structure,
Mhm.
and that anything that isn't in service of that, that isn't going to come up with like an immediate solution, right? Any like Fed posting aggressive stuff, right? If it's not that, then it's a waste of time, right? And to me, it's like, no, we got to play the long game, right? That
Mhm.
is it's the doomer guy, right, who's constantly thinking the world is over. The reason that meme is, it can be beneficial, in that, like, there's some, like, prepare and get stronger and like address problems, but it can be severely undermining, in the sense that if you don't look at the future as something that you can build long-term projects into, where
Mhm.
you're building that fraternal network, or that family, or that community that is a long-term investment. Like family is the longest term investment. Ideally, you're
Mhm.
having kids who have kids who have kids who have kids, on and on
Right.
and on. If you don't see a future, then you're not really going to be invested in doing that. Right. And I think that more people need to realize that the battle that we're in is long term. Yes, all of these horrible things, population decline, immigration, crime, government, yada, yada. It doesn't matter. Still have a family, still build your community, still invest in things, because if you don't, then you do lose. Right. There is no scenario where you don't
Mhm.
have a family and, things work out. Right. So, I think that needs to be understood in our space, and the people who are not kind of moving us in that direction, there's some people who are their heart's in the right place, they just don't get it or whatever. I think that there's more people who are just literally trying to be subversive and amass power for themselves, right? If you're the head of a LARP, right, then you want as many people in the LARP and invest in the LARP as you possibly
Mhm.
can be. So I think we need to get people out of the LARP and into like the community action, LARP maybe. Fake it till you make it. But um anyway, that's how I judge people online, and that's my frustration largely with the space, is that the people who are undermining that healthy appreciation for, family, community, long-term planning.
Yeah, man, there's definitely a lot there, and all good stuff. But I had like three or four
Yeah.
different things, so I want to hit on
Yeah.
one of them, and that's you mentioned kind of like these people LARPing, and it's so funny to me because there's this concept of like a covert contract, right? Where basically people want you to confirm their beliefs for them. If like I can get all these
Mm,
people to act like this, then it confirms that my belief is right. And really, like, I
mm,
think all of us need to be of the perspective, especially as men, that like, I don't care what their perspective is. Like, we could be friends, we could be cool, but like,
mm,
even all the people that I co-host shows with, you name the person that follows me on Twitter,
mm,
I love all you guys. I'd buy you a drink tomorrow if you were in my town. But guess what? I'm still going to play in my band, whether you like it or not. I'm going to do this podcast if I
mm,
want to do the podcast, whether anybody likes it or not. And then if all my social media gets deleted tomorrow, I'm going to continue to live my life because my daughter's going to be here shortly. I'm still going to be a husband. I'm still going to be a guitar player. I'm still going to be a mechanic. Like all these things are still
mm,
going for me, regardless of whatever take sellers say online. And I think like people who really just need confirmation of their LARP don't have this similar kind of setup for their life. Like if you see these
mm,
people, they have to condescend down to people. They need people to confirm their worldview. It's like, well, why? Because if your worldview is right, then why do you need other people to like confirm this for you? And there is something to like,
mhm,
I need to hear other people out to make sure that I'm not being a retard. And this is something that I try to do
mhm,
frequently is like, okay, well, um, if I said this, do I sound like a quack to reasonable people? And it's not that that should be your only heuristic, but it's something to be aware of at all
mm,
times. Like, am I going down the wrong path too far unnecessarily? That's something you need to be aware of.
mhm,
But at the same time, you also need to be true to yourself. So, like, there's a fine line here, but I do think that, you don't always need people to confirm everything about you. And I think that's a lot of what like these LARPers do when people buy into the LARP. It's literally like cult like
mhm,
behavior where like I need people to confirm this
mhm,
because if they don't, then it's the end of my world. But it's like who cares? Like this is just the internet. You should have a good enough life that like your network around you, all you are fine. Even if you disagree in your local network, it's like, yeah, we're still cool. Like you said, I got my boys. I could
mhm.
call up my band tomorrow. We're literally going out on their boat next weekend, and it's just going to be a
Nice.
good time. Like we're just going to enjoy
Mhm,
life. We disagree about political stuff. We'll sit there and fucking talk about it. We're having a beer or something like that. Oh, hold on. I want to go, jump in the river real quick. Let's go swim around and we'll get back on the boat, eat some, peel and
mhm,
eat shrimp or something like that and keep doing our thing. Like that should be the goal. Like you shouldn't be worried about people confirming your beliefs online. Like, I'm sorry, first name, bunch of numbers, your opinion isn't relevant.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on this point a few times already, which is like, look, the vast majority of people, they're good people. They want
Mm,
to do the right thing. And if you have this kind of mentality of like, they're still my friends, like especially with my family. Like I disagreed, like 2016, the rumors are true, right? Like I was on the left for when I was growing up. I didn't really
Mhm.
think too much about politics, and like 2016 was the first time I was really paying attention that whole election cycle. And
Mhm.
I started figuring things out. I basically I like to think that I like speed ran from like the left to all the way to to the right or whatever. And now I'm like just I think it's more about truth than it is about anything
Mhm.
else, is what we're all trying to get at. um but like I disagreed very vehemently with parents, friends, and part of it was I didn't understand how to disagree with them on these things.
Mhm.
And I focused more on the ways that we disagreed than the ways that we did agree, right? And now when I interact with friends, family, people in my community, I'm just like, yeah, like it's easier to do that now because I understand like it's not about, do we say the right thing or the wrong thing, or do we think exactly the same on this, that, or the other thing? It's do we care about what really matters, and can we drive towards that? And if people have a misunderstanding, it's usually not because they're a bad person, or
Mhm.
they want to be subversive or whatever it is. It's just like we're all on our own path figuring it out. And the thing I say all the time too is like, if you want people to agree with you, become the best version of what your ideology can produce, right? Like be a good person, do interesting stuff, like be someone who's easy to be around, that people want to be around. And then like eventually they'll ask, they'll start picking up on the good things that you have to offer. And I think that's far more effective than trying to like scream down someone's throat about something.
Yeah, well, one thing that kinda you had mentioned there towards the end that kinda reminded me of something that I was thinking about a little bit earlier is, like,
Mm,
diversity is our strength always sounds so cringe, but, like, when you think about that a little bit more, right? You start peeling this back a little
mm,
bit, and you think, like, "Oh, actually, like, okay, so I'm good at being a musician," let's say, or at least I hope people agree with
mm,
that, but, like, "Hey, I'm good at this." Um,
mm,
my dad and I, we talk about this kind of stuff from time to time where it's like, there's some stuff we could do fixing the house and whatnot that, okay, we could handle this. But when it comes like the serious
mm.
plumbing, oh, no, no, no. Well, like, we don't do that because, hey, my
Yeah, yeah,
plumber, he's good at that. That's diversity because,
yeah.
like, hey, he leaves the fixing cars to us, we leave the plumbing to him, right? We understand where we are
Mhm,
in this whole hierarchy of issues. And even in like my
mm,
workplace, like, okay, well, me and one other tech are like the two lead guys. We have all our training. We've been doing it for me for 13 years. He's been doing it for 26, 27 years. So like, we're kind of
mhm,
like the HNICs in this respect. Then there's the other guys who are still good at what they do, but they're not quite on that level yet, right? This is another
mhm,
example of diversity, which I mean, you could use hierarchy for a different word, but like I think of this, and even like when it comes to immigration, when people start talking about like, oh, diversity in a country, like, no, 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 no. I think like America being what it once was back in the 70s, majority white Christian males who ran the country and are in the country that made America great. And then you go over to Ireland, it's mostly
American
Irish
honors.
people. Yeah, exactly. Like all
Mhm,
these countries are, diverse compared to the other countries, but like you love that about that country because like, oh, this is specific to them. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is specific to people to Yinzers, right? People who
mhm,
say yins or buggy or certain words. Like there's certain things about every single city you're going to go to that you're like, oh, this is cool. And I like this about this
mhm,
city because you know what? If I go to New York City, it's not going to be like Pittsburgh. If I go to Pittsburgh, it's not going to be like Miami. That's cool. We don't want like this androgynous society where everything is just what's the word, like mellow and boring. You want to go to different places and see
yep.
different things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that again, there's a lot of nuance with these ideas, and you're
Mhm.
exactly right that like you want. I think of it as like biodiversity, right? Like
Mhm.
when you think of like a biome of like animals, and you have their like predator, prey, food chains, all that kind of stuff. Like the part of the beauty of that kind of like range of complexity is that yeah, it all kind of supports itself. It all plays different necessary roles, right?
Mhm.
And like the value of that too is that if something comes through and you have giant forest fire or something like that, there's enough biodiversity that something will survive and adapt and change and all this kind of stuff. I think the where the philosophy that you're describing versus like the left and how they see diversity is
Mhm.
they think difference is good for difference sake,
Yes.
and also that like that we shouldn't judge quality in those different realms, right? For them, it's like, oh, like these plumbers are no better than those plumbers. And it's just like, no, no, no. Like there's certain guys who you like do not want them near your plumbing. And then there's certain guys who are like, yeah, they're gonna do the work, right? And so like that difference in the dimensionality of how we think about diversity, because again, that's like another sophon, right? It's gotten in our way to appreciate diversity on the right, because that's such a heavily coded word towards like the left, and this kind of like you know broken down low quality diversity that they're kind of like purporting to have, or they're creating categories that make no sense or whatever, right? But yeah, I want to live in a society where I have like an excellent guy who's really into plumbing, or someone who's like really into farming and growing stuff, or like people who are cooks. We were talking about this, I think, before the podcast, of like how much value there is in like committing to a very specific thing, because it
Mhm.
opens up so much more after that and through that. And I think that, yeah, like so much of how we talk about these things it's like limited by the reactionary nature of like realizing how bad society was and like trying to fix it, and like we don't want to like bring over the wrong words, but I think we got to make sure we're not like hamstringing ourselves in kind of the range in which we can talk about this, because to your point, there are good forms of diversity that we want. We just, like, if things are running well, you don't make that, like, if you don't make a perfect society better by adding like other things, right? It's like
Mhm.
it's like you don't want diversity for diversity's sake, but there is healthy diversity, and then there's versions of that you do want.
Yeah, one thing that immediately came to mind when you were talking about that is basically like the left would see forced integration as like a necessary good because you're
Mm,
forcing diversity, but like diversity in regards of like, okay, well, this area here is this, and then this area over here
mm,
is another thing, like appreciating their own domains and having borders between those domains and respecting that is very, very important. I think that's more of like how
mm,
more of like a right wing perspective to kind of look at like these kind of things. Like I was saying earlier, I think about, I've worked with General Motors now for over
mm,
10 years. I can look at someone like my dad who owns an independent shop and he works on all makes and models. Okay, well, he has to have a different tool set and a different knowledge set to do that. Whereas, like, if you give me any GM vehicle, I'll be able to fix it. Or you go up the road to my dealer chain's Honda store. Those guys are going to be really good at Hondas. And then, maybe if I need a favor, hey, do you know something about this Honda? Yeah, here's what you're missing. And then, they could call me, hey, we have a GM. What do we do? This is what you have to do. And, you respect people's specializations. And once again, to your point, this opens up the window after that. So, bringing it back to music, um, playing music, it was like, okay, well, I got good at playing guitar. I get into a band, then we release music, and then people hear it, and it's like, oh, we want you to come play this area, or like, we think you'd be a good on a bill with this band, or this promoter heard you, and they think you'd
mm,
do really good at this venue. Just when you specialize in one area, much to your point, it does open up more opportunities because people recognize and respect expertise, or people really just giving a fuck. Like we had a mold problem in my house, and I remember my
mm.
wife looking like genuinely interested that somebody else gave a fuck about how to deal with mold in the house. Like, this sounds so dumb, but it's
Yeah.
just like when you see someone's passionate about something, you can't help but just be like, that's cool, because you know what? This person gives a shit about that and they want to do the
Hmm.
right thing. And just when people get really anal about stuff, it's like, oh no, this is like what they care about. This is what really animates this person. And you can't help but just love that about people in their respective lanes. It's just loving how
Mm.
passionate they are about something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I agree. I think like it kind of dovetails nicely with the whole point about like networks, right? It's
Mhm.
like the value of a network is you have all of these people who have specialized knowledge, right? And if you can just call on them when you need them, right? Like we like one of the ways to think about a good fraternal network is you should be able to say, I got a guy for that. Every time
Right.
there's a problem, I got a guy for that, right? And like a guy that that you've had drinks with, that you could like call up on the phone, right? And say, like, I lived on the East Coast for a long time in a little town
Mhm.
just outside New York City. And like my local barber, right? Like I had his number. And like
Yeah.
there were plenty of times I'm like, my hair's way too long right now, I need to go get it cut. But like, I just call him up or like send him a text, be like, hey, I'm in desperate need of a haircut, I've waited too long like I normally do you have any time like today? And he'll be like, yeah, I'll fit you in, like, come at this time. So like I think that's like the ideal place that you get to, or like, or you have like a car mechanic like that, or you like if I know my like I have an uncle who does uh he does like construction and
Mhm.
landscaping and a bunch of other stuff. He runs his own business, and like he knows the guys down at the lumber yard, right? Like he'll show up and just like throw a bunch of stuff and he's like, bill me, like,
Yeah.
it's having those kinds of things, like that kind of community where, it's high trust, right? Everyone's kind of like collaborating, helping each other out. Like I'm working on this networking article right now,
Mhm.
and it's both kind of a explanation for the rationale behind networking, because I think one of the common reactions that people have to like intentional networking is, well, you're just trying to like exploit people, right? You're just trying to bring them in and get them to do something or whatever. And it's like, well, all communication is somewhat manipulative, right?
Mhm.
My
Yeah.
goal right now as I'm conveying these ideas is to manipulate your mind into understanding what I'm getting at, right? But if I am trying to do that with the intention of like really revealing truth to you, then that's good, right? Like I don't see that communication is inherently bad. And I think similarly with networking, it's like, yes, you can network for personal gain and for manipulation and control and all this kind of stuff. Yes, networking can be bad when used poorly, or used for bad ends. But if your ends are to create social structures that are healthy, that are positive, that are collaborative, right? Um, like the interesting thing about that is, like, you can put a little bit of effort in, right? And that's the whole idea of a network, is you're going to get more out than you put in. But that's not because you're taking advantage of people or extracting stuff. It's
Mhm.
like that's how networks should work. They should be win-wins, right? Like you should have like your guy who's the plumber dude, right? And he's just going to be able to fix that problem way easier than you, right? And so you
Right.
were kind of exploitative in the sense that like you got an hour of his time and you saved yourself like 8, right? But
Mhm.
similarly, down the line, at some point, you're going to be able to help him out or make a connection to him, or just, whatever it is, right? And that's the beauty of these things, is they're extremely empowering for everyone who's involved, right? That high trust goes a long way, and they're not. It's not about exploitation. And the last thing I'll say on this is, I had a post about how um, one of the most important things that parents can pass on to their children is not just money, or wisdom or insight or any of those kinds of things. Like that's definitely helpful, right? But the most important thing is, if a parent spent a bunch of time creating a family around them, an extended family that has these healthy family gatherings and this good cohesion, and they care about each other and they love each other, and then they've invested in the community around them, and the community is well knit, and
Mhm.
is building things that are going to be valuable in the long term. And then they have this fraternal network, so that like when their kid starts looking for a job, they can reach out and introduce them to people, and do all this kind of stuff, right? And so the idea is that when that parent passes on, right, they're not just leaving the kid in kind of this isolated state where I was like, I've given you all the tools, and go figure out the world, right? It's I've given you all these tools, but I've also connected in with this network, this
Mhm.
extension of myself that's going to positively like love and care and support for you. And the idea is that like, I've created not just like a good child who's going to be successful. I've created a world around that child that's going to help take care of that child, and hopefully that child also puts energy into that, and that helps them and their children, and so on and so forth. That's what society is. I think that's what the boomers have forgotten, is they've become very very economically minded. I call like the new version of the kind of the mainstream delusion, as I used to call it. I call it delusional utopian consumerism, right? It's like everything's
Mm.
perfect, everything's okay, and the most important thing is GDP line goes up, right? And you see this all the time with the boomers, where they're
Yeah.
just like, oh, like if I get sick or whatever, I'll just hire someone, I'll go to hospice care, or like, if I want to enjoy myself, I'm going to like pay for a cruise, right? It's not, they're not thinking about like barbecuing with their neighbors, or building these relationships, or doing all these kinds of things. And so, like, I think that's a mindset that we need to start moving towards more often. And I think the other thing is, like, you clearly grew up in a community where that was much more prevalent, right? That you seem to have like a very good thing going on between the bandmates and the different kind of like groups that you run and all that kind of stuff. And for me, that was, had that a little bit growing up, because I think, like, the parents just inherently, like, you go to like the PTA groups, or you have your we did like Boy Scouts and other sports teams and stuff like that. But like, I look back on my parents now, and they don't really have that same connection. It was like through their kids, but they've kind of largely taken a step back. Whereas I think that, there's probably a lot of people like me who, like, we feel a little less connected, a little bit more isolated. Like, our parents didn't put in that energy to kind of pass those relationships off. And then it's also a part of like going to college in a different state, and then going to get a job in another state completely. And you're not really, a lot of people are not, like, staying around their hometowns as much. But like, reorienting people towards that, showing them the value of that. I think there's like that, if we are to be successful, and I know I keep harping on it in this conversation that we're having, but I think it really does come down to reinvigorating these like social networks, these keep getting people to care about family, fraternity, and community.
Yeah, I completely agree though, and I think it's necessary to harp on that because I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm sure people are sick of hearing me talk about my daughter to be here soon. But I keep thinking like, okay, well, I have to understand a few things, right? She's going to be an autonomous person one day, and everything I do, even if I think I did the exact right thing, there could still be an absolute catastrophe laying on the other side of that.
Hmm.
The other thing that I think about too is like, okay, well, how do I send her into, when she's 18, an adult? If she wants to go to college, okay, well, like in my opinion, the ideal situation isn't necessarily that she goes to college, but there's that she's fostered a good relationship with somebody. And then, my wife and I have given her enough that, like, hey, if I want to start a family right now, I could do it and not worry about it at all. Like, that to me is like the goal state. But
Mm.
then I also have to understand, like, she's 18, she may not want to do that. And that is just completely out of my control. But much to that point, it's like, okay, well, hopefully,
I would say it's out of your control.
but like for the most, or I don't, I don't
Hmm.
think anybody really knows exactly how much, we could
So, and
necessarily
not
imprint
to
on our
like,
kids. Yeah,
not to make the whole big deal out of this, but I do
sure,
think that one of the mistakes that we've made in the modern world,
sure.
especially like fathers, is this idea of, if I give my daughter like freedom to make her own decisions, that's out of love, right? That's out of like care and appreciation. And like, I want her to be herself.
Mhm.
But I also think that you can have that. And you can also have this understanding of like a father as like, I'm the protector, right? Like, I'm
Mhm.
supposed to keep her from making bad mistakes, me. And then,
Yeah,
you'll probably have what, like 50 sons as well, and all, like
hopefully.
all this kind of stuff, right? And like, the responsibility of all of the men in the family is to protect the women, right? Is to keep them from making bad decisions, right?
Yeah.
It's to, when she brings the boyfriend over, to like take him aside and show him your gun collection, and like
Mhm.
insinuate that no one will find him if he does
Mhm.
anything in the wrong way that isn't gentlemanly, like, right? And so I think that, like, that's part of the reason, and we understand this like intrinsically when we talk about
Yeah.
like strippers have like daddy issues, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, what's, so like, I almost feel like it would be better to have like for fathers to be more overbearing than less, right? So
Mhm.
not
Ye
to like, because I know that what you're saying, like, it comes from a place of love. Like, you
Mhm.
absolutely want your daughter to like live a good life and feel like empowered to make her own decisions. But part of me is also like, when I have a daughter, like I almost wanted like arrange marry her, like that
Mhm.
would kind of be, the thing is like, just be like, no, this is a guy who I know is it, or and I think that in the modern world, you do it in a way where you're not pushy, you're not like, like you're like,
Yeah.
you will marry him or whatever, right? But you're like, you're talking them up, you're spending time with their families or whatever, right? Because one of the things, it was like a couple months back, I was talking to a friend about this, but it's, you know, not just caring about our children, but also caring about our grandchildren, right?
Mhm.
And because that could be like seen as an even better metric of success, of like, yeah, you made another generation, and realizing that the people that you have around you in your community, right? They're not immediately family, right? They're close, right? But the real thing is you might be family through your grandchildren, right? Like the guys that you hang out with now, right, could have children that your children, have children with, right?
Mhm.
And so it's like very important to think about like who are the people you want to be around, right? It's like would if Sam had a bunch of kids, would you want Sam's sons, spending time with your daughters, that kind of thing, right? Like probably way better than like the vast majority of like random people out there, right? Like because
Yeah.
right, like you'll both hold each other to account. And so I think that's like a thing is like, we want the best for people, but it's that hyper individualism, freedom of choice thing. It's like sometimes I kind of like, like it sounds like a hot take and kind of contradictory, right? To be like, I love my children enough that I'm going to like dictate what's good for them. But it's like,
Mhm.
finding the right balance there, I think. But yeah, so sorry to like kind of jump in on you though.
No, 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 that's okay. But it's that's kind of like the ultimate question because I try
Mm,
not to like dive super into my childhood or anything like that. But like I moved around a
sure.
lot, and
Mm,
childhood wasn't like the worst thing in the world, but definitely could have been better. That being said, I understand that like there was a lot of suffering I went through that I would not be as prosperous. That's actually a really good comment. Free will can be guided morally. Um,
yeah.
there was a lot of stuff that I went through as a kid that like I wouldn't wish on anybody, but I realized
Mm,
that like I came out on the other end of it a lot better for it. So it's like, okay,
mm,
well, my wife and I are walking into this. I like the house I live in now is the house that I bought, and it just so happens to be the nicest house I've ever lived in my entire life. And it's not like I spent
mm,
ass loads of money. I mean, a dollar goes a far way here in Pennsylvania, but like to the point, um, my daughter and then hopefully next few kids will have a much better life than I had. Okay, well,
mm,
looking at it, it's like, okay, well, if you give somebody everything they want, specifically kids, then that can not always, but it may turn them into assholes because they feel entitled.
mm,
You spoil them.
sure.
What's this happy medium of like, okay, you're
Yeah.
imposing some necessary level of suffering because you see the big picture. They're not going to see it,
Mhm,
and you have to understand they're not going to see it. Like these thoughts are always running through my mind. And I
mhm,
honestly, I don't think there's anybody that really knows like the perfect formula for this. I think it's kind of like a trial by fire. And everybody says, oh, I'm never going to lie to
mm,
my kids. I'm never going to do this. And I'm one of those people right now. But though I also have to realize like there's going to be a time when my daughter, the podcast schedule is slammed. I had a shit day at work. I had a bad workout.
mm,
Everything in the day, every single star lined up to say fuck Kyle on this day. How do I, in that moment, make sure I don't take the easy way out and just say some bullshit to my daughter to get her off my back?
mm,
And when I could just take a little bit more discomfort in that second to orient myself and her in a better direction. Like those are the kind of
yeah.
things I think about constantly because it's never in the moments that like right now I'm happy, right? My wife and I just went out and had dinner. I had a margarita. Life is good. Dinner was good. We rode back home
Nice.
smiling, laughing, and everything.
Mhm,
It's never these moments that you just break. It's like I said, the
yeah.
stars align, they all say fuck you, and you had a shit day, and your daughter is just right pushing you right over the edge. Once again, how do you stay strong in those moments? I
Mhm,
and I don't think anybody has a good answer for it. I think it's like I said, trial by fire, and you always hope you do the best because I agree with you that most people mean well, but it's just in those moments of weakness, maybe they do let the worst parts of themselves take over and then orient themselves for the worst rather than the better.
sure. And I think, like, this is a question that I got a lot when I was running, like, the weekly Sunday spaces, and, it was like, "How do you know if you're a good person?" And it's like, "Well, look, you're never gonna be a perfect person, right?
Right.
But the person who's good, and is the way I see it, is like, do you care about being a good person? And do you think
Mm,
critically about how to, you know, display that through your actions, right? Like how to actually be good with the things that you do, right? And so when I'm listening to you talk about this, right, it's like you clearly care, right, about being a good father and doing the right thing. And I think that is, to your point, like good parents are supposed to be a representation of the world that their kids are going to have to live in,
mhm.
right? Because it's, at some point you're not going to be around, right? That's kind of the whole idea, right?
Right.
And so you want them to be able to operate effectively in the world, the real world, without you having to be their guardian, right?
Mm,
And so how do you get them to realize how to operate in the world, right? Well, it's not to shelter them from things and pretend everything's
mm,
fine and hunky dory and just always perfect all the time, right? It's to be realistic, but not more. You don't want to cause more suffering than is necessary for them to learn
mhm,
that, right? I think that's what you're effectively saying. And that's the question, is like, how how do we don't want ignorant kids. We don't want ones who aren't street smart and, poorly equipped to deal with
mhm,
the world, right? But how do we do that in a way that they're not going to become entitled, or they're not going to become fearful, right? And to your point, I don't think anyone has the perfect answer, but I think that the magic, if there is some sort of like magical thing that you can do, it's to care, right? It's
mhm,
to think critically and to be aware and intentional with what you want to do. And that's how I see a lot of the content that I create, is trying to illustrate on a meta level what are these kind of patterns for flourishing, right? What are the transcendent things that we can orient towards that will generally be good, and to not be prescriptive and say, hey, you have to do this or that or whatever, right? It's not like a specific action that you have to take. It's just kind of awareness of these things. And so I think, your point is really well taken, where it's like, we all, we want them to be successful. We just don't understand, like, we don't want to make the mistake of making it too easy, or too hard, right? Cause more suffering, or risk ignorance. And so, finding that middle line, it's funny. I saw this like LinkedIn post where it was like, every white dude giving advice is always like, it's not black or white, there's always some sort of balance, and it's just, every time I say there's nuance, I'm like, fucking LinkedIn post is running through my head. But it is true, right? Like,
yeah.
there is a balance to all of these things.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's like I said, it's something that I think about a lot, and I talk to other parents about it, and like I said, it's never clear to me what the exact answer is, but, even, like, this ties back to, like, having political conversations. It's just that you should always try to talk to people you disagree with and agree with, and figure
Mm,
out if you're getting it wrong, if you're getting it right, or, try to get different perspectives, because most people in this sphere, right, have some kind of
mm,
angle. They have a perspective that they want other people to agree with, or that they think is right because of the information they consumed. So, how are you conscious of that while also realizing that, like, okay, maybe what you know is true versus what they know is true? Like, there's always just, I feel like I'm always just taking in all these different perspectives. And when I see somebody that's so bought in, I always think of this line that I hear, somebody I watch say quite a bit. He said, "It's not the people who have questions that scare me; it's the people who have no questions that scare me." And like that to
I
me,
like
when I
that.
see people who are so convicted and just cannot be wrong no matter what, I'm like,
Mm,
I don't know if I have anything to learn from you, because you're not curious anymore, right? Like I said towards the beginning of the conversation, you could find me in the first couple hundred, probably first 100 episodes, saying things that I would completely disagree with now. And then, even like music
mm.
views. I used to hate Slayer. Now I love Slayer. It just constantly, I'm trying to evolve and learn and incorporate new information. I think this is very important to keep in mind in any avenue. It's just that, like, you should always consider, am I wrong, or could I be doing better?
Yeah. No, and like, kind of going back to the whole like meta philosophy strategy approach, right? Like, it is those things that I care about. It's like, are you thinking about what is good,
Mhm,
right? And trying to orient yourself towards it, which requires self-awareness. That's a very big part of this. It's just trying to kind of look at yourself critically, look at the world around you critically. And then it's about intention, right? It's like, okay, I've thought about what's good. I've thought about my life, the context that I live in, the decisions that I have in front of me. I
mhm.
feel like this is the right decision to make. Am I then, once I know that that is the decision that I'm landing on, am I making the effort to enact that, to drive that into reality? Um, And I think like that's really the best you can ask. And then you kind of go through cycles of like, okay, I've been really intentional about driving towards this goal. Like, let me take a step back and reassess. Is this really the goal I want to be oriented towards? Am I really kind of considering all the factors? And then am I really intentional to the degree, right? Like you have that kind of reflective cycle. And it's funny, right? Because a lot of this kind of these ideas of meta strategy or philosophy was really born out of looking at tech startups and a lot of the like the work philosophy around that. Because I think that software is very cerebral stuff, right? It's all like in cyberspace, and you can kind of do what you want. And so they generate kind of like a meta strategy for work. If you're looking for books to read, there's this book by this guy Elijah Goldratt, and he wrote this book called The Goal, and it's all about factory workflow optimization. It's pretty interesting stuff. You might actually find that there's like pretty relevant to some of the auto mechanics things, and maybe even like music development and all this kind of stuff. But the book I really liked that kind of followed that one was called The Phoenix Project. It was written by a bunch of guys who were basically the early version of what DevOps engineers would become. And DevOps, if you're not familiar, basically the infrastructure guys. They not only build kind of like the Docker, Kubernetes, cloud cluster, scalable system stuff that you might hear about, but they also facilitate a lot of the software development, because usually when you develop software, when you're writing code, it has to be in a specific environment that is similar to the production environment where it will actually be live and hosted. And so you have to have these, testing environments, and then you have to push that code to production in a way that you're not pushing things that will generate errors and break things and whatnot. And so there's this whole structure to how you build and produce code. But the Phoenix Project is all about best practices, borrowing heavily from Elijah Goldratt's The Goal. And they're in this work philosophy format. So it's like a story about this guy who takes over like the IT department. He gets randomly promoted because somebody leaves at this auto parts company. And so it's about him like trying to get a handle of the situation. And there's these very, very interesting characters. The obnoxious girl boss in leadership, who's constantly like forcing them to go faster with the projects, which inevitably breaks things. And so they have to like learn how to like resist pressure from leadership to do things before they're ready. And it's like a lot of stuff. A lot of people, this is like my highest recommended book, because I do a lot of interviews in tech and in that field and whatnot. And I'll always the people who do read it, they're always like, oh yeah, like this guy is exactly like Brent or whatever. And so they'll talk about that stuff. But the point that I'm getting at there is that the like meta strategies for work and work kind of like structuring how to do work, it's very similar to like the meta myth. Like Joseph Campbell's The Meta Myth is actually teaching you how to solve a problem. And that's the reason that it's like fundamental to every single story is the most important thing that you can teach the next generation is just problem solving, right? It's like start with the knowledge that go out into the world. You have your problem that presents itself. That's the call to action. The wise old man giving you the item of power. That's the knowledge from the past, right? That's being passed on to you as you go and adventure out into the new, right? And you have trials and tribulations and difficulties, and the death and rebirth is like the death of the knowledge that no longer works and the birth of new knowledge that does. And that's what allows you to conquer the great evil, right? Solve the problem, and then rescue the damsel in distress, or win the gold, or whatever, that's the reward, right? And then you return to the village, and that's bringing the knowledge back, right? It's the problem solving thing. And like Ray Dalio wrote a book on this. He's like the founder of Bridgewater. Interesting dude, but he wrote like Ray Dalio's principles, and it's largely borrowing from that. And I think he's bit by a similar like meta philosophy bug, and I kind of liked a lot of his stuff. And so I think the Phoenix Project's very similar in that regard, right? But all of this to say that cycle of awareness, defining goals, awareness of like all the elements of the problem, coming up with a solution, then like using the intention to drive it through, and then just kind of constantly iterating as you go and being self-reflective, like very applicable to your life. But I think the other thing to caveat that with is like, we live in a society where we're constantly on this like this career track of like, you got to keep moving up, you got to keep doing this, that, and the other thing. And I think it's tough because we don't have a lot of that guidance, right? Like we used to, especially like families used to be a lot closer generationally where, that your father could help you raise your children and, kind of that knowledge was passed down and people were more kind of closely connected. And, now we live in a world where it's like really tough to have cohesive families and like all of the ideas in the mainstream are very counter and we don't have as strong a community. And so you do have to largely know so much of this on your own. And so it does take like intentionality and hard work and stuff like that, but also to the point, like going out in the boat with the guys and stuff like that. I think more people need to just touch grass, get out there, relax, enjoy your weekends. I brought it all back. Yeah, we did
it. Yeah, well, I think that's probably a good place to put a little bow on it, man. We'll definitely have more conversations in the future, but yeah, I think you wrapped it up pretty nice there, man. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed the conversation we had on your show. So, like I said, there will definitely have to be more. When I was looking down here, I was making sure I wrote down the book that you recommended there because I'm already like hearing archetypes in my mind of people that I worked with throughout my career. So, better go ahead if you got anything to plug, if you got any final thoughts, anything you want, floor's yours.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, always a great time. Added you to a few of the group chats, and I feel like it's been been great having you in there. Yeah, as far as like my content, so man, life's been crazy. It's one of those things where I do this for fun. I'm not getting paid or anything like that, and so like I've been kind of lax with getting out the podcast, and I'll have people on and stuff like that, and that's all up on YouTube and whatnot. But I'm spending a little bit of time writing this networking article. I think that's like kind of running double duty for me because one, it's something that I've been wanting to talk about and get out there for people, but also it's a reaffirmation of like the things that I need to be doing in my network that can be done a little bit better, right? And so I'm kind of going through a rebrand of my content. I'm trying to update that and better structure that. I mean, one of the goals there is, hey, look, I know I don't have a huge audience or, a ton of people following, but the people who do are pretty kind of on this wavelength we were talking about earlier with like the beacons and all that kind of stuff. And so, my goal has always been, and I've had a lot of success with this already, is just connecting people, like saying, hey, you're in Pennsylvania, you should go hang out with these guys who, do some pretty interesting stuff. I don't know if you guys have gotten the chance to catch up, but I'm going traveling a little north as I'm going to like do a little bit of traveling the next month. And there's a bunch of guys who don't know each other, but know of each other. And I'm going to we're going to have like a dinner and bring a bunch of people together and stuff like that. And so the thing that I would say is like, if anyone's hearing these ideas about fraternity and community and family and resonates with that, that's, I'm expanding that network. Right. And I'm always happy to introduce other people with other people. Like, you got to meet your mutuals, you got to meet people in person and build those relationships. And so that's the big thing. I have a Substack. I'm obviously on X. I have a website. It needs to be updated with all the Midjourney like animation stuff. I'm probably going to be doing some fun stuff with that. So, but a lot of this content, it's meant to be broadly accessible, not like a like spicy aesthetic or anything like that. Just trying to get at truth. And those who are interested, want to get involved, feel free to reach out. My DMs are always open. But Kyle's, it was a pleasure. I'm glad we got the chance to connect, man. Sam speaks highly of you. I've been, watched some of your shows. And so it was like one of the group chats and people were like talking up and I was like, I got to reach out to this guy. And yeah, the music project stuff's been going, it's pretty cool. I've got a bunch of friends who are we're pretty big into that. And hopefully I don't know, I'm really excited because I feel like we're on the verge on the online sphere of like this next thing, right? This very like wholesome, positive thing. And the more kind of people, the more I've been online and kind of been sorting like the people who are on the right wavelength, so it was great running across your content. And yeah, man, pleasure chatting and thanks again for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'd love to hear that because I feel like there is like a next thing that has to happen sometime soon, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm going to keep doing my thing. A Common Crown's going to put out new music, and I just got this feeling like this is going to be the shit, and like maybe it's not, maybe it does all right, people like it, but regardless, I'm kind of looking at all this stuff. I'm like, I'm in a good place right now. So, um, I guess I should probably put my final thoughts here as well, and that's the I walked off stage. It probably would have been about 8:45 on Saturday night, and that is the last time that I'll walk off stage without a physical daughter here in the world. And to me, that's just
Mm,
absolutely insane. The next time I step on stage will be before Hinder on September 13th. So I know it's a little bit of like shameless self promotion here, but it's crazy for me to think about this, and it's been a crazy journey over 400 episodes and meeting up with people like you and kind of this whole networking deal. And I think that there's a lot of good going on right now. And um, all the content I do, I always do because I do have the absolute love for people in mind. And, if you can't tell, I'm a
mm,
very gregarious person. I love spending time with people. I love talking to people about ideas and different
mm.
things. I am a people's person. So to meet up with people like you and who kind of share this vision of getting people out there and together, it's just awesome. And I'm glad that you're doing it. And I'm glad that it seems like other people are kind of getting around to this as well, because I think when you get offline and you meet people in person, you have a barbecue, you go to a concert, you go out for drinks or something like that, all like the ancillary bullshit of this person's 1% Jewish or this person's not a libertarian or whatever thing you want to spurg about that day, it's just
Mm.
gone and nobody cares. And you realize, oh, there's a person right in front of me right now. We have a lot in common and we're just gonna have a good time right in this moment. And that is so much more important about knowing the intricacies of this policy, this foreign conflict, or anything. That just the personal connections you build with people through this kind of stuff, one more time, is just infinitely more important.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely the touch grass methodology for life is undefeated.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Meta, one more time, thank you, man, and I think we'll call her a show there, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Of course.